Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Joe. Yeah, how was your weekend?
It was okay. I lost my voice, so I couldn't talk the whole weekend. But apart from that, I guess that's probably good for the rest of society. So win-win.
But you're
Um,
here now. You're here. Your voice came
I'm
back.
here. The voice is
Okay.
sort of coming back. Yeah, I still
Yeah,
sound
yeah.
like crap. But anyway, how was your weekend?
It was very good. Yeah, it was. Yeah, just had a nice, fun weekend. Watched a movie, did some shopping, caught
What'd you
up on a few
watch?
things. I watched a movie called The Taste of Things. So this, like, French language fancy movie. So,
French, fancy French movie. Are there such a things as like unfancy French movies? Like
oh,
very
definitely, definitely, yes, absolutely.
okay. But in the spectrum of French, you tend to err more on the fancy side or on the
No,
kind of
no,
more
I
pedestrian.
watch I watch a lot of trashy Belgian TV. So there you go. You
Hmm.
can ask Andy Petrella about that.
Uh, I will. I think we'll see him.
We'll see him shortly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So thanks to everybody showing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt and I think we kind of want to do these at least once a month or some weird interval like that. Just Matt and I. So we started the
Kind of
show.
mix it up.
So
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then apologies. My voice is still shot 2 weeks into this, so I don't even know what to do at this point. Well, I'm on medications now, so that's great. Hopefully this clears up soon. So got to be on a speaking tour next week. So
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, how many days straight are you going to be speaking? I mean, it seems like you're almost on tour where you're going to be in a country for 2 days and then go on to the next country and go on to the next region.
yeah, what is it? France and Switzerland and Saudi Arabia on this one. Then I guess I'm going back to France, middle of March. So it's super fun. Hopefully this crap is all cleared up by then. But
Yeah.
anyway, if not, then I'll just I don't know, just show slides and do like text to speech or something like that, and that would be kind of cool. So, well, I caught a talk with a Venkat Subramaniam. He is a really popular software engineering architect and thought leader, probably my favorite architect in the world. But anyway, he gave a talk in Salt Lake City, and sorry, saying hi to people there. Gave a talk in Salt Lake City on Friday or Thursday at UJUG, Utah Java Users Group, which I like to go to once in a while. And his whole presentation was just him typing in a text editor.
And was he talking at the same time or was he just typing?
He was well, he's talking and typing at the same time, but I thought that was pretty cool. I'd never seen anyone just type what their main points are live. I thought that was actually a really cool and engaging way to do a presentation. So
Yeah, and he has really good design around it as well, as I recall. Like he just types the code in or types in, and somehow he's very, very rehearsed, and it just comes out extremely well. I don't think I could pull it off in the same way. Maybe with enough practice and just like imitating his style.
yeah, I've thought about incorporating some of it, but it's yeah, Venkat's definitely one of the best speakers I've seen in any discipline. He's just very
Agree.
engaging. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
awesome. So, but his whole talk was on basically the trade offs between microservices, modular monoliths, and then monoliths. So,
And this is interesting. This brings us into a topic I think we want to discuss today, which is I don't think microservices are going away, but I think there's a lot more skepticism now than there was a couple of years ago at the height of the microservice craze.
mm,
I think at the time, because Netflix and Amazon were making microservices work really well, there was the idea of pizza box teams, and so every young startup, every small company, every enterprise Fortune 500 company with a really ambitious software team wanted to adopt microservices. And then at some point, it's like, wait, maybe this doesn't make sense for everyone. Maybe we're not Amazon. Maybe we're not Netflix. And you actually published an article very recently about the modern data stack. And I think there are some parallels between the modern data stack and microservices.
yeah, let me. Well, I'll probably misquote more appropriately some of the things Venkat was saying in his talk, but he does a lot of consulting in microservices and just architecture in general and monoliths. And he said like was it 65% of the companies he's seen are maybe more are actually doing microservices, but he said most of them are doing it wrong. Most are doing microservices because they think that they should do that without any good reason for it, right? So I'll get into why this ties into the modern data stack in a second. But does that sound familiar?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's do
Yeah.
microservices. But he said, depending where you're starting out, that's absolutely the worst idea possible. It adds a bunch of unnecessary complexity. Monoliths typically are the way to start. Especially if you're a startup, your main thing is going to try to make money and get product market fit. The notion of introducing microservices early on in a startup, unless there's a competitive advantage to it, it's absolutely silly, and will cost you a lot of extra motion. You could try to do things like sell product and get customers. So
Yeah. I think the other thing we've seen again and again with both microservices and just data analytics in general is that small startups tend to build each piece on their own because that's what Google and Amazon did.
yeah,
Forgetting that at the time the stuff didn't exist, and a lot of that stuff where they're building microservices you can just buy off the shelf, and doesn't mean you want it to be off the shelf forever, but like in those early stages where you're just trying to get product market fit and grow as quickly as possible, building it yourself creates a lot of extra friction, and you often end up with something much worse than the off the shelf solution.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that was his point, was just, understand the trade-offs, right? I mean, I think we'll get into the notion of cargo culting with respect to data stacks in a bit. But his whole point, and I think I wholeheartedly agree, is that just don't do things because you read a blog post and because everyone tells you it's a good idea. Understand your situation, the value and outcomes you're trying to achieve, and figure out the easiest way to get there, not the hardest.
Exactly.
And then there's a notion, once you start with a monolith, you can break it into a modular monolith, which is sort of microservices, but still monolithic. And then, gradually graduate towards microservices where it makes sense. But, his whole point is just starting with it is almost never a good idea. But as you said, most people are starting with microservices and doing a terrible job at it, which obviously keeps consultants like him very busy, which, it's awesome. Keeps consultants like us busy in the sense where there's a lot of train wrecked architectures out there that later need refactoring. And, so thank you for not thinking too hard about this.
Well, it goes to something else we see a lot, which is quite often we get called in to do a road mapping engagement and to design a future path for data warehousing and data modeling and, all the core data analytics. And then we discover that what the company really has is an organizational problem. Like, they have very talented people, but they're working on other aspects of responsibility and such. And I think with microservices, maybe it's the same kind of thing where you adopt microservices, but you actually still haven't set up your organization correctly to really benefit from them. And you listen to things Jeff Bezos said in the early days, I mean, there's the API manifesto, there's the idea of the pizza box team, there's the two-way door. Like, for him at Amazon, those organizational principles were actually probably more important than the microservices concept itself. It was more about how you organize the teams that are going to build out those services than anything else.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is just classic Conway's law, right? So you're going to build systems and architectures according to the way that your organization communicates. And this is, I think, the inevitability of it all, right? So we'll talk a bit what this means for data teams. I think there's a lot of parallels, but I would encourage people to read the book Team Topologies to really understand just the how organizational layout manifests itself in architecture. If you are a very siloed, monolithic culture, throwing microservices into it is probably going to be a very unnatural fit. Now, of course, there's the reverse Conway's maneuver where you can have an ideal architecture, then reorient your teams to that architecture, and that definitely works. But that also means you got to be willing to reorg, right? So,
yeah, and I think another thing we see quite a bit, and you can tell me your own experiences with this, but with microservices, again, the idea is that you have these separate teams that are maintaining services. So what happens with a really small startup? Well, in many cases, the entire startup is a pizza box team. In other words, you can feed the entire startup in the early days with 2 pizzas. And then what happens is you're trying to maintain 20 microservices. Instead of having separate teams maintaining them, you actually just get massive sprawl, and there's not enough mental bandwidth to maintain all the stuff that needs to be maintained. And you certainly can't build new microservices because you have no bandwidth to do it. So you're just struggling to keep up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing in
exactly.
data. Yeah.
Same thing. And so Carl says organizational design is key, and many organizations don't rebalance their orgs for how business strategy and needs change. They never rebalance their org 401k. Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, it's hard, right? I mean, because it's I hate to reference that book, Who Moved My Cheese. I hate that title. It's stupid. You're not a rat in a maze, but sometimes you are, I guess, depending where you work. To be fair, but yeah, I mean, rebalance is hard, and organization structure, it sort of happens implicitly, and it takes probably the will of the CEO, uh, to make that change. I can't post comments here because for some reason LinkedIn comments aren't showing up, but I'll read them. Matthew Mullins, what's up, Matt? Says or asks, can you talk about how data products might parallel some of the same issues um, that appear with microservices? Sort of ad-libbing there, but yeah, I'll take a stab at this. I think that when data products, I think at least as we're manifesting it, there's several definitions for data products. I tend to take the one that Zhamak Dehghani proposes because that's more in line with the theme of the microservices and data mesh, which is where she got her inspiration from, domain-driven design of microservices. But I think there's a lot of parallels to this. And I think going forward, what you're going to see is, if the notion of data products, I'm not just talking about like, I think there's the kind of the Walmart version of data products where people are just saying, oh, I'll just share this table or view with you and call that a data product. Yeah. Right. I don't think that that's what she meant by that. This is, it's because you're still dealing with a centralized monolith at the end data serve these data products and share them. But I think that, as software and data teams begin sort of melding together, I think this is where you're going to see the true intersection of, or the true notion of data products coming to the foray using a microservices architecture. What do you think, Matt? Keep talking because my voice is about to start going.
Oh, no, totally fine. I mean, I tend to agree with, so here's the thing I've seen with data product definitions. It appears to me that over the past maybe 2 years, vendors have started to co-opt this notion of data products, and they've turned it into what you've said, where it's like, oh, you share this table, and the table is really good and it's high quality, and that's a data product. And if you think who's like the biggest in tech, like the most iconic product person of all time, probably Steve Jobs, right? And to me, this is like saying in the original Mac that your enter key is going to be a product, and the monitor is a product, and the power switch on the back is a product. And there was some truth to that, but it was holistic, right? Like everything had to work together, and it had to be an experience. It's not just like the camera on your iPhone that's a product. It's everything working together. And that's where I think if we're thinking about data products, it really needs to be a holistic experience where if I'm a business user, all the tables integrate very seamlessly, and the data model is very coherent and consistent. It's very easy for me to find answers that I'm looking for. To me, that's a version of data product that I like much, much better. And it's not that these vendors are making bad tools, but they're kind of choosing a definition of data product that suits their ends and their sales cycle, which I get. But I think we need to make sure that we're, as an industry, steering this notion in a good direction and really thinking holistically about what we present to people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of data product washing out there right now, and I think the term is being misappropriated. I mean, again, it's sort of in the eye of the beholder, but at least according to the data mesh definition of it, the 4 pillars, right? Data ownership by domain, data as a product, self-service data, and federated computational governance. Those are the 4 pillars. So, I think the last one, federated computational governance, is still like the missing link that just doesn't exist. But the parallels between the data products and microservices are definitely there. I mean, that was the whole notion behind data mesh, was taking the software approach and applying that to data. Because Zhamak's a software person, she's not a data person, right? So she looked at data and she's like, "Why the hell do you do all this stuff?" Like, there's no interoperability between tools. We're going to get into this in a bit, right? Very few standards, so everything's just cobbled together against some centralized monolith, right? So how do you expect to deliver something that isn't the same thing you've been doing for the past 20, 30, 40 years, which is a centralized reporting, kind of centralized everything, right? So that was the notion of it. But that means you're operating in a monolithic environment, and so it would be, so at best if you take domain-driven design and bounded contexts, and that notion, right? At best, you're doing what I call the Walmart version of data products. It's good enough for a lot of people, probably. But you couldn't really truly do the equivalent of microservices with it. It'd be impossible by definition.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's funny too because we had Bill Inman on the show. What was that now? Was that like 3 years ago
Oh
or
yeah,
something?
he's been on a few times. Yeah.
He's been on a few times, but we were kind of he was sort of debating the idea of data mesh. But then at some point he said, data mesh per se, I don't have a problem with. I just feel like even if you have the data mesh, so you have these different teams managing their data and sharing it, you need a curated version, which is the data warehouse. And so that was, in a sense, he didn't say use the term data product, but he was basically arguing that you have these engineering teams working together, but then someone can still have this holistic curated experience off of that data because there's a team
Yep.
that makes sure that it's presented correctly to the end user, so they're not just on their own wandering in the wilderness. And to me, that's like you go to, I don't know, a really well built website, say, and there are all these microservices behind the scenes. But I, as a user, don't want to see those. I don't want to see any of that. I just want to see an experience, and that's kind of his notion, I think.
Yeah, there's a way, the implementation details shouldn't matter at the end of the day, right?
Exactly.
If you're using a data warehouse to serve a data product, as long as it meets the criteria, right? Then sure, whatever. Lee has a question here. Lee Colin. Now that it's more me, but I'd love your thoughts. Now that you're deep into writing your new book on data modeling, what are your thoughts on the feasibility of subject matter experts or small data teams adopting a data modeling techniques with reasonable success? He says in his current job, his team, 3 data engineers, find it difficult to carve out the time to untangle the nasty mess of weeds that is their data warehouse, while also juggling stakeholder buy-in, BAU, etc. And so I think my answer to this is, I was actually writing about this morning. It's really you have 2 spectrums of data modeling. You have intention and precision. Intention means, are you intentionally modeling your data or not? And then how precisely are you going to model it if you are intentionally modeling it? The opposite wouldn't be true. You wouldn't unintentionally model data in a precise way. That would not make any sense. And then the other one's fast and formal versus, or fast and relaxed versus, slow and rigorous, right? So you can move fast. And I would say, given the fact that you can't carve out the time to tangle the messiness of your weeds, and I suppose you have your answer, you probably will never get to it. But these are the realities you need to understand before you, I think, embark on data modeling. And the other part of it is, if you're inheriting a data warehouse, I was actually reading a lot of articles from Venkat actually yesterday about data debt, but more in software, right? So his whole notion is if you're reading data from, say, legacy systems, right? And his notion of legacy is anything that has been put into production. The moment it's put into production, it's legacy.
It's legacy. Wow.
He's right.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
I tend to agree. Yeah.
Yeah. But his whole thing is like there's a whole rubric, right? So like how bad is the data? Can you get away with just not using it, right? Could you build something in parallel and so forth? But I would say, given your constraints, if you find it difficult to carve out the time, either find a way to make the time or just deal with the mess you have, and I don't know, take up a hobby like drinking a lot or something. I don't know, to ease your sorrows. So.
But I mean, I think along with this data debt notion comes something else that we like to emphasize, which is that ideally the software teams that are developing the back-end systems that will feed analytics down the line are stakeholders in those analytics and are involved in a modeling conversation that's not just for production, just getting it into production. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do we incentivize software teams to work with the downstream consumers as they're designing things? So
well, that goes back to the organizational part, right?
Yes.
It's as simple and as hard as that. I don't know if there's what would the other answer be?
Yeah. No, agree.
Yeah. I mean, you can try and automate this, but I think at the end of the day, there's, and you definitely have automations like data contracts, but again, like working with your upstream providers and software teams working with their upstream providers, if they're having to deal with, third-party data, I mean, that's, I don't know. It's a complicated question. If you figure this one out, by the way, that's like, it's one of the holy grails I think we're all trying to figure out, but it's hard for a reason.
Yeah. And I mean, ideally, data contracts become kind of like CI/CD, right? Where CI/CD should be both a tool and an organizational principle, where your kind of DevOps ops side of the house is directly communicating with the software side of the house as commits come in to determine whether they get merged or not. If you don't have
Yeah.
that, then it's just a kind of a tool that's not going to serve a whole lot of purpose, I think.
Well, I mean, it's the same as testing. I mean, in
Right.
software, right? So
Exactly.
unit testing, regression, but it also reminds me of the notion of interface. So if you've written
Yeah.
Java or C or anything, then it's like
Scala.
you have
Yeah.
an interface file that literally sets the contract. You can fill in the implementation details, but these are the set of, say, private or public methods you're going to be using in your class, for example, right? And that's what it is. You can't violate the contract. So, but I mean, it's interesting. Again, back to the notion of data products. It's interesting, just like, and we always joke about this madhouse. Data is basically 5 to 10 years behind where software is, but all the stuff that software people have been doing for a while, data people, discover and repackage it into data. This data ops, um, all this stuff.
Data
So
ops, ML ops, like all these movements are closely related, and trying to build on top of software. I think we're still struggling in some cases to define how we're transferring software principles into data, even now.
it's a bit of yeah, it's hard. I mean, I even saw an email today with like, somebody was writing about, unit testing and data. And I'm like, if you're writing functions, like, why wouldn't you ever unit test that? But I don't know. It's weird. Yeah, and Lee responds, nicely answered. I'm Irish, so the access to drink is not a problem. Cool, go for it. Because if I'm in your situation, I don't know. You got to figure it out, or you just, I mean, and actually, it's interesting. I'm going to be, like, who was it? Gordon Wall hit me up yesterday, or was it Saturday? And he's like, "Hey, I got a thought experiment for you. Like, what would happen if, we inherited a data stack that there was no existing team, no documentation, whatever? What would we
Oh
do?"
yeah, yeah,
So we're going
yeah.
to actually do a podcast on this whole thing later this week for the 5 Minute Friday on my other part, but yeah, that should be interesting. And then Bart, what's up, Bart? I think he's going to be at Skid. He writes, the organizational aspect is the hardest part. Explains why so many organizations are struggling with data mesh adoption too. Too much change. Yeah, I agree. Well, this leads us into our next topic, the modern data stack and its demise. I would say that the same issues that plague any sort of transformation, I think that actually played out with the modern data stack and its sort of, I guess, now official demise. So
Yeah, yeah. Where do you see the, let's call it the modern data stack Big Bang? What was the event that kicked it off? I have a very specific idea about
why
this,
don't you
but
go first? I need to rest my throat.
Actually, there are two. So you mentioned one of these very specifically in your article you published on Substack, I think over the weekend, that Redshift, I think, was kind of the first big salvo for most people in the modern data stack, right? That's the first thing they encountered. And as I think technically BigQuery came first, but what's funny about BigQuery, you mentioned that it was immature at the time. And even in, I want to say it was 2015. 2015, I was working with both Hadoop and Teradata. So, modern big data movement, and then very traditional MPP data warehouse system. Sorry, Bill, for misusing the terminology, but that's what the vendors would call it. And then I knew about Redshift, like, hey, Redshift SQL engine can do a lot of what Teradata can do. And then I looked at BigQuery on Google's website, and I'm like, what even is this thing? Like,
Same.
what does this do? I don't understand what this is. Even though it was a really great tool, they weren't doing a good job at marketing it. But
Well,
then
that
there
was
was this
classic Google
maturation.
back then.
Classic Google back then. Even now,
And
sometimes.
now they
frankly.
can't market to save their lives, is true.
Yeah. But then the next thing that happened, though, there was a lot of evolution. But to me, there were kind of two things that really kicked off let's call it the modern data stack craze. And I'm not saying the ideal ideas aren't useful. What I am saying is that it became kind of a fad too, right? Like, it became a very, very compelling idea that was attracting a lot of funding and such. And I think it was COVID, as you said, a lot of money floating around suddenly, and we saw people who got COVID loans for their companies who also happen to be investing as angel investors. I don't think that's a coincidence. We both know people who did that at the time. So there was a lot of money flowing around. And then the Snowflake IPO in September 2020.
That was a big
Biggest, what was it, like $3.4 billion raised as that came to market, and the stock price shot up and people made a lot of money very quickly. And so I think venture capital was looking for the next big thing. There was a lot of money there, and that's what they settled on. Like, okay, Snowflake is big. how do we create the next Snowflake or
Yeah.
the next thing that will attach to Snowflake? Like, how do we make money off of this movement? And it really took economic changes and the large language model craze to kind of finally end that phase of venture capital fad, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Snowflake was definitely the big event. Oh, I mean, actually, it's funny. I was doing the literally taking the Snow Core Pro or Snow Pro Core certification during the IPO. So I just wanted to get the damn thing
That's
over with. So I get back
right.
and watching the
Yes.
so I put some money into the IPO and it made money, but I was like, you know, you get this thing over with here. But yeah, that was definitely a pivotal moment. Yeah, Big Worry. Actually, you're right. It was 2010. I think it was launched. Um, and like you, when I looked at it, I was like, I have no idea what this is supposed to do. You can't do joins. Like it has a weird dialect, and so But I think you're absolutely right, though. It actually maybe might have been the first serverless analytical platform. It wasn't called a data warehouse back then. I remember Jordan Degani telling us that um, yeah, if you tried because he tried recruiting people onto the BigQuery team, I think, and if you called it a data warehouse, people would just like run the other direction because it's like nobody wants to work on that at Google. They want to work on cool stuff. But that was based on Dremel, I think it was, right, the internal
Exactly.
analytics
Yeah.
tool. But Redshift was like the first described as a data warehouse, offering. And then, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a period for years where you start seeing tooling around, that Redshift ecosystem specifically, Fivetrend. And Snowflake comes out and does a bunch of Redshift takeouts,
Yeah.
right? And Teradata
Exactly.
takeouts too.
Yep.
But
Yep.
Redshift was their primary target because it was like, I remember being in those conversations early on. Snowflake sales team would be knocking on all the Redshift customers' doors and saying, "Hey, do you want something easier and better?" And they killed it.
Yeah, I mean, because Redshift was and is a great tool, but there's a management burden to it, and there's sometimes a lack of maturity to the tooling around it, and Snowflake kind of solved those problems, and so it became the de facto standard for a long, long time.
They could
Very
start
cool.
from scratch, though, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
notion of like
yeah,
separating compute from storage and having micro
yep,
partitions was a new idea. What was it? Redshift was built on Postgres 8, I think, and ParaXL for the MPP platform.
yep,
So it's like
exactly.
you have that legacy burden in there. Not that it's a bad thing. Redshift is a great product, but Snowflake started from scratch being a cloud native tool. But what's interesting now is just the ecosystems have spawned around all these different platforms, right? And
Yep.
so even Snowflake doesn't call themselves a data warehouse anymore. They call themselves a data cloud, right? And same with Databricks has their own notion of this, and same with Azure's got Fabric, and AWS has whatever they call that. So it's
Well, and it comes back to the fact that AWS's ultimate success is not Redshift or S3 or EC2, although they make money off of all of those things, especially compute storage. But it's being a platform. And Matt Turk, maybe it was even a year ago, he had an article about how to be a really successful unicorn startup, it's not just about hitting that valuation of $1 billion. It's really about being
yeah.
a platform more than anything else. Because if you're only selling one tool and you only ever sell one tool, it's really hard to ever justify a valuation of above $1 billion, I feel like.
Well, we're seeing this right now. I mean, companies that raise at valuations, all these unicorns are suddenly, there's a really good article that I posted on my Substack from a blog called Investing 101, which is the exact opposite. It's actually pretty advanced stuff. But he talked about, I think it's Kyle Harrison is his name. Anyway, fantastic blogger, but he wrote about just the markdowns that are happening in valuations. And you're talking like 60, 70% markdowns from basically the ZERP days, which means that if you're, at $1 billion valuation, you might be able to raise a valuation of 300 million, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. Because
Yeah.
it depends
Yeah.
on things, things that didn't matter back then, revenue, um, right? Money. Back then it was all GitHub stars, number of logos you're collecting, and all of a sudden it pivots to having to run something resembling a real business. So
Yeah, and the logo thing was interesting too, because I think there is real value for a business in having big name customers, but often the logo collection turned into more like a trading card collection, right? These weren't real engagements or real relationships. It was just like some analyst in some dark corner of the company is using the product and they get legal to sign off on using the logo. There you go. Now you're worth $3 billion. And unless now you need to actually show that you're really engaged with that company and that they're at your conference giving a talk about like this is how X product changed our data
Yeah.
practice and made us better for customers, something like that. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I mean, especially back in the heyday of all this stuff, 2020, 2021. I mean, I remember you and I would just go for walks. I mean, we talk all the time. In fact, for the audience, this is kind of how the Monday morning data chat started. Was Matt and I were just
Yes.
recording the same conversations that we had, just walking around because we're dorks. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
but I think we'd often commiserate, like, why is it that these companies, um, many of which are making less money than our company, why are they valued at like hundreds of millions or maybe $1 billion? Right? It was bananas. And when we looked at them, we're like, okay, the feature sets aren't. I mean, they solve a problem, but it feels like they're all features. And it's hard to turn feature sets into companies. There's a lot more to it than that, right? And so I think and because of the position we were in doing podcasting, I mean, and running, arguably one of the first data engineering consultancies in the U.S. We got inundated with requests by companies to partner with us, to look at their products and review them, and all this other stuff. And I wrote in the article, after a while they stopped taking these calls because it was all the same stuff all the time. There's literally no differentiation. Everyone, I can't even tell you how many data integration companies I'd seen, right? All like, oh, we're going to be like Fivetran for the modern data stack. It's like that already exists,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah, my other comment would be that in general, I feel like it's hard to build a unicorn startup B2B. And it can be done, right? But what are your biggest like unicorns, high value companies? They tend to be B2C, business to consumer. So Google, you can build up an audience, a user base of hundreds of millions or a billion people because you have a really great tool and now you suddenly have this huge advertising target audience. I feel
Yeah.
like the activation energy to build a B2B business, to build a full platform is much higher. Like the actual concrete investment to go from nothing to something that businesses have to have is really tough. And Snowflake is kind of the exception in that sense. If you think about Amazon, they did it by building a B2C business first, right? They built a really solid core of retail. And then off of that, they built this B2B business that's just massive. But like the scale that was required to become Amazon is just astounding. Like the
Mm-hmm.
number of machines, the number of data centers, the number of personnel. So
Warehouse,
yeah,
all that
yeah,
stuff,
yep,
logistics.
yeah.
Yep. That's what it takes, right? But or if you're NVIDIA, right, you're supplying all the chips to,
Yes.
the AI craze, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, I think,
Although I'll say that's an exception that proves the rule as well, right? How did
yeah.
NVIDIA get its start? Well, they're still a major, major consumer business, and that fed the business for a
Well,
long,
it
long
started in video
time.
games.
Exactly, and they're still big in video games.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, and Bitcoin, and
Yep.
I
Yep.
like their approach. Their motto is like, we're all like 30 days away from going into bankruptcy or something like that. So they're always super paranoid, which I like.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't get complacent. So um, yeah, but back to the modern data stack. Like, again, Tristan wrote that article. I think it dropped last Monday or something like that, or whatever. But I mean, that sparked I think a lot of discussion and eulogies and so forth. And I think it was good. I was glad that he did it. It's a sign that I think we're just ready to move on to the next thing. And in his words, it's, moving on to just analytics, which, I mean, um, sure. I mean, that's what, at the end, that's always what it's been. Um, but as I wrote too, I mean, it did its thing at one at the end. I mean, it accomplished its goal.
Yeah.
So there's not much to like say that, it was a total waste of time. I mean, if you want to go back to the good old days of before the modern data stacking, buy software that way, go for it. I urge you to go build that time machine and do that to yourself.
Question is,
So,
are we drifting back in that direction though? Because think
well,
about AWS. I mean, yes, there are all these individual tools you can buy there, but you're still dealing with AWS. Sometimes it feels a lot like Informatica or something.
I mean, I think we always joke that in the end, everything becomes Informatica,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because at the end, you have the monolithic, centralized platform is sort of where things inevitably go back to it. Now, this contradicts what we were talking about, data products and mesh, but that is the inevitability. It happens all the time. Give me an example where it hasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the famous quote about bundling and unbundling. I'll have to look it up to get it right, actually. Maybe you know it off the top of your head.
Uh, I don't, but
Hold
yeah,
it, hold
bundling
on,
and
hold on.
unbundling, yeah. But Elvin, shout out Veronica. She posted something in LinkedIn. Tech changes exponentially while orgs change logarithmically. Yeah, I would say that that's very true. Um, Logarithmically at best too. I think there's like an asymptote in terms of change that you can tolerate, especially as you get bigger. Um,
Yeah,
but then the logarithm, that curve has a sort of asymptotic behavior as well. So, what did you find the bundling
yeah,
unbundling
yeah.
thing,
So
Matt?
this was Jim Barksdale. And let's see, the quote basically is there are two ways to make money in business: bundling and unbundling. And so, yeah, that's we've seen the unbundling. Now we're probably going to see more bundling again.
Well, let me ask you
Looking
this though:
back, yeah,
in the unbundling era, I mean, how many of those were actual businesses that made money,
yeah, that's a
right?
good
Because he
question,
also said
right?
that
Yeah,
businesses that making money. And I'm like, how many of those actually became real businesses that made money?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, often the unbundling phase is a build out, and then those companies get acquired, right, to actually start making money in the future. That's kind of what happened with cable companies. You had all these different channels pop up and then get aggregated into these mega monoliths, and then those kind of got dismantled by Netflix. And I'm sure we'll see more phases
But
of
now you see more
integration.
consolidation in the streaming
Yep,
space,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
So Paramount's looking for a buyer. So,
yeah.
that's just, and people are finding that streaming is actually really hard to make money in.
Exactly. I mean, there was an explosion of different streaming options during COVID because everyone was sitting around on their couches all day, right? Just watching TV. And so there was an assumption that that could be a very, very successful business. And then we had kind of a almost like a 1999 happen for streaming where people went back to work. They had less time to watch. They didn't want to subscribe to 10 different channels. They
Yeah,
canceled half their subscriptions and stock valuations collapsed, right? Oh,
happens.
yeah. Oh, by the way, on the bundling and unbundling, let's give credit to Ben Stansel. He's the person I heard that quote from
Okay,
a couple
Ben. And
weeks
then I
ago.
know that
Yeah.
we had
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like a debate actually with who was it? Ethan Aaron and Ananth Pakaldiri. I think we had them on a show once back in the good old days, and they were debating the bundling and
Yes.
unbundling argument
Yes.
too. Yeah. So, um, but I mean, it's funny actually. I went back and listened to a few of those podcasts and kind of in preparation for the show, and it's kind of scary how much we got it right with our discussions back then. Go ahead and listen to it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
conversations a few years ago, it was like I think we or I mean, for the audience, Matt and I tend to be very I wouldn't say skeptical, but very reality based. I don't think we're not too hot, not too cold. But I think we a lot of the stuff we called out, right? I mean, there is a lot of consolidation happening now. There's, we called out back a couple of years ago that VCs would be pulling back, and there's going to be a lot of casualties in the field, and this is exactly what's happening right now. The modern data stack is like, um, the ecosystem just grew too much, and as we
Right.
pointed out, I mean, in every vertical, it was like you had dozens and dozens of companies. Um, each vertical has a natural growth rate, right? Unless something completely innovative and new happens. But you just can't have a sea of sameness and expect that you're going to grow the total addressable market that way. That's not how it works. It defies the laws of physics. Um, there's only so many buyers out there. If you're selling to the same 5,000 people and you have 20 different companies doing the same thing, it just simply doesn't work. The math does not make any sense.
Yeah. Let me go back to what I was saying about B2B versus B2C. I think part of what happened in the peak modern data stack craze is that a lot of small companies that didn't have the capacity to do analytics before suddenly got access to it. And so it became B2B became a bit more like B2C, much larger
Yeah.
audience, a lot more people using Snowflake. The problem is that that wasn't going to be scalable forever. Like at some point, these small businesses started getting the bills and saying, whoa, 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 we have to pull back. Like it's great that we have analytics, but we can't just do unfettered spending anymore like we're doing now. We're going to go bankrupt, especially as our COVID loans have to be paid off and other things. And so I think there is a durable change. I think
Yeah.
analytics will remain much more widespread than it was back in like 2010 or something. but you're not going to see like exponential ramp in spending in the future. There's going to be a lot more cost control for small businesses continue to use Snowflake
Oh
and other
yeah,
tools.
we see this all the time.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is too, it's like, the question I keep asking, and I asked Bill Inman this too, is like, you know, it's funny, despite all these progressions and advancements and quote innovation in the data space, with the quote modern data stack, why is it that we're still struggling to answer the same questions we've been struggling to answer for the last 30, 40 years, right? Is the data right? Can I believe it? Am I getting value out of it? Probably some other questions, but like those three alone, we failed to crack that nut. In fact, I would say it almost got worse in some ways.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your article. You talk about how uh, best practices seem to go out the window, and that's what happens sometimes with democratization. Like you lose those controls at least temporarily. You have a new generation of people getting access to tools without training and building out data without data models, and that eventually creates massive data debt. Going back to what you said about Venkat.
Well, yeah, data debt for sure. And what Lee
Yeah.
was dealing with too in his earlier comment about like inheriting a stack and it's a big mess. It's like, yeah, that mess didn't just magically appear, right? It creates it just kind of sort of happens over time.
Yeah.
And so that's the inevitability of it. And what I noticed, I mean, we both teach and I've done lots of education in the data space. So wrote a book on it, for example. But I think one of the things I also noticed was just a lack of knowledge about, prior best practices that back in the day you wouldn't even question twice, right? You would just sort of do things. But then because data got easier to work with, part of it, I think I blame, the data science craze and pandas and everything else, like where you just, I love data frames. But at the end of the day, it also allowed you to do whatever the hell you wanted with data, right? And then you couple that with tools that allow you to transform data in any way, shape, or form you want, and suddenly data became a very reactive instead of proactive exercise. You're just trying to answer questions instead of getting the broader context of what you're trying to do for your organization. I think we saw this time and time again. So
Yeah. I mean, so my take is that the newer data tools are just demonstrably better
oh yeah,
than data tools of the past. However, the nice thing about data tools of the past is that, yes, it was a huge pain. It was very high friction, but your CTO would go sign a contract with Oracle or SAP or Teradata, and they would deliver boxes to your shipping dock, and you would install, this system, this database system, and everyone knew that there were constraints. And so it's like, all right, we have to have a data model because we only have, so many terabytes of storage space. If we go over that, we have to start deleting things, and that's going to be a big problem. And now it's really great that everything is so scalable, but it often means that people just didn't think about constraints. And at
yeah,
some point, that becomes a cost problem, a computing problem, and just a sprawl problem. Like our
sprawl, big
human
time.
minds can't wrap our mind, we can't wrap ourselves around this stuff. It's the mess is so massive that we can't make sense of all this data without a coherent data model, which is what your whole point in writing the book, I think.
Well, it's one of the root causes of I think the situation that we find ourselves in right now, where, as you point out, there's endless amounts of sprawl. There's a lack of coherent, or there's just a general lack of coherence in terms of understanding data and how it serves the organization. These are symptoms, but one of the root causes, I think, that we've lost sight of, the art and practice of data modeling. As one example, I would say the other aspect to this, and probably my next book, is on architecture.
Yeah.
Because you have all these analytical systems that you can just cobble together, but there's no sense of interoperability between these different products. You end up with a Frankenstack.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and here's the other thing too: is I called it, jokingly called it Joe's law of, or Reis's law of architecture and data modeling. But it's like, at the end of the day, your architecture does dictate your data model, just because of the inherent limitations of what your architecture can support for a physical data model. And so because you cobble together tools first, which is the mindset that most people are in, it's technology first, it's data second. So what happens is you start shoehorning in your data to fit the systems in which you've cobbled together. And So there's this Nassim Taleb actually had a good book called The Bed of Procrustes, which is a book of a bunch of aphorisms that he writes. But the Bed of Procrustes is a reference to an old fable or an old tale where there's a hotel with a bed, right? And so at this hotel, instead of finding the bed that's going to fit you, he's going to cut off your limbs so it fits the bed.
Yes.
So
Yeah. It's funny too. I mean, the irony of the situation we're in with not designing architectures is that there's never been a better time to design architectures around data. In other words,
yeah,
going back to the lack of constraints thing, there are so many options. There's just an embarrassment of riches. And yet, because we have so much available, we don't think carefully about what we're doing. And there's this opportunity to build the perfect architecture for the data we have and the business model we have. But that rarely happens. We end up just cobbling things together, basically.
well, I mean, that was the notion
Yeah.
of the modern data
Yeah.
stack, right? Like it was, loosely coupled modular SaaS and cloud-based tools, which I think inherently is a great thing. But you had people who had no sense of architecture, cobbling things together, no sense of data modeling, cobbling things together. What the hell do you think is going to happen?
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
So now we're in an age, not the modern data stack. Tristan himself put a stake through the heart of that vampire, or whatever it is. We're in a new era now, which I think has a lot of eerie similarities to the modern data stack era for the data industry, and that's quote AI, a term that keeps resurfacing every few years, like a phantom. What are your thoughts on AI right now?
That's a good question. So I find it very exciting. I think the applications of it we're seeing right now are not the applications that are going to be interesting 5 years from now. I constantly see Medium articles about how I built with AI. I spent 3 hours and built a business that generates $1,000 a month. But then if you keep reading, you discover other examples where, for example, recently an airline was forced to honor something that their chatbot said, something incorrect about refunds. They were forced to honor it, right? And I think we're headed into the trough of disillusionment with AI, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be useful. It means that it's going to take us a while to really get it dialed in and figure out how to make it useful and safe for businesses. I think right now, a lot of the applications of it are extremely reckless. And I think there's going to be a big legal reassessment of how companies are deploying these tools. Legal departments are going to come back and say, wait, you're doing what? Like, you can't have that be customer facing with no checks on top of it. But I think it is durable and here to stay. Again, it feels a lot like the late 90s, which both of us remember well, where there was all this enthusiasm about the internet, but very few of the businesses around it in that era stuck around. We eventually figured out the internet, but it took a while.
I mean, we're on it all the time. But that's the utility of it, right? That's what they point out in the article. Is even with the modern data stack, it's sort of like you don't marvel at the internet anymore. It just is faded into the woodwork. And the same thing's going to happen with AI and whatever manifestation it is. But it's funny because what I notice is a lot of the modern data stack tooling companies. I noticed it's a big day to London last September, walking around the expo hall, and I was like, crap, every one of you has an LLM embedded in you now. And I know your teams, like I know you don't have machine learning expertise on hand. So you're basically just built like a thin wrapper on top of a ChatGPT probably, or OpenAI. But that's not a moat, because as you point out, like when we're talking about what's a product, right? Is the enter key a product? To me, what happens is, unless you can have an argument that the introduction of that new feature set grows the total addressable market, or grows the customer base, or grows market share for you, it's simply a race to keep up, right? So you're in this interesting prisoner's dilemma thing where you have no choice but to kind of AI wash whatever product you had before. But everyone else is doing it at the same time. So again, there's no differentiation at the end of the day. You simply move the goalpost.
Yeah, and we've seen so many different phases of product crazes. I'll call them. Sorry, that was not meant to be alliterative or rhyming, but anyway.
It was beautiful.
So, for example, thank you. So, for example, do you remember when Alexa suddenly kind of surprisingly got really big. I think it was like
Oh,
2015.
I got stories about this one.
And it just blew up, right? And then everyone all of a sudden was building Alexa apps. And Techstars, an incubator, had this whole like round of we're going to fund startups doing Alexa apps or voice-based apps on different platforms. And then after a couple of years, it turned out that this wasn't all that useful, and it kind of crashed and burned. Same thing with the Siri craze on iOS devices. It became this huge thing, and then eventually Siri became useful, but it didn't like completely take over people's interactions with phones, and that was the
Oh yeah.
original projection. And that's the thing you have to watch out for when you start obsessing with the craze instead of utility. Are you just tacking on a feature that's not going to be useful, that's going to fade in a couple of years, and then you're trying to figure out the next thing to do?
Oh yeah, like Amazon gave me 6 years of $200 promotional credits every month because I wrote, I think probably one of the first Alexa apps back in 2015. I think it was. I got drunk one night and was just like, I'm going to make an app that I can just ask it what the air quality is in Salt Lake City.
That actually sounds useful.
Yeah, it was. And there wasn't
if anyone knows about air quality in Salt Lake City, it's often very, very bad.
Oh yeah, it rivals Beijing. It's like toxic air.
Yep.
Yeah, so I wrote this app in like probably an hour. Figured out the Alexa workflow, built it in Lambda, and that was it, right? Because it's okay. Let's play with this. And then a few years later, a startup I was at, we actually partnered with Amazon Business because the application that we had, we felt okay. So maybe there's an application that we could have for Alexa, because the idea at the time was Alexa was going to become a conference phone for offices, right? And so that was a big partnership that went nowhere because Alexa went nowhere. I mean, we have a mutual friend actually who had a whole company around Alexa apps and voice apps,
and they pivoted. Like they do something very different now. Yeah, they had to. Like it wasn't really an option. And that I think most of the startups in that incubator class ended up pivoting or closing down at some point because it just wasn't. They jumped right into the craze. They thought, okay, this is the next big thing. This is going to be the next iPhone. Everyone's going to be using voice apps, and then it just did not materialize.
Yeah, but the Alexa at the time, I mean, it was a phone tree basically, right? I mean, literally when you wrote the Alexa app, it was a heuristics-based, this sort of utterance, I think that's what they called it back then, would achieve this sort of result, right? And so forth. It was just basically, you could use if, else, or case statements and basically have your Alexa app that way. And you had to say things a certain way. So that's one thing I like about this generation of large language models is you can sort of put whatever you want into it, and out pops something. So I think there's a lot of utility there. I think long term generative AI is awesome. I mean, the demo that OpenAI had with Sora, I don't know if you caught that, the 1 minute 1080p videos. You can just text prompt it and it'll.
Oh, I read about it. I haven't checked them out.
Sick. Yet, at least it's a demo, so I have no idea how good it is. But that's ridiculous. So I mean, it's just early days too. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. All this stuff right now with like every AI app, like it has like the star with the other magic stars around it. Like this is sort of like the cheesy animated GIFs that you saw back in the day, or like the in HTML you used to be able to do like the blinky stuff.
Under construction, right? It would always say under construction.
This is what this feels like. It's like super early days. It's like crap. But I mean, long term, this is where it's going to be. But again, you're seeing all these startups getting AI funding, or AI startups getting funding, and those are the only ones getting it. But even then, if you read like the information, the news outlet, right? I mean, they're saying that a lot of AI startups now are actually having trouble raising more money because at the end of the day, what's the competitive advantage? What's the moat? Unless you're training models, if you just have a wrap around OpenAI is going to kill you during the next demo day. That's precisely what happened last demo day.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think back again to the late 90s, everyone jumped in and wanted to start an internet company because suddenly everyone could do it, right? Like you could just get a book on HTML. And frankly, if you'd done other programming, you could probably figure it out in a couple hours and have a basic website up. In fact, you could just type some text in and have a website, right? Like you didn't even really need that much HTML to start. And then at some point, people realized, oh, maybe this isn't that interesting because anyone can do it. And Amazon can probably do it better than you can, and eventually Google a couple of years later after the crash.
Well, and it's very expensive to make these models, right? I mean, the information had another article about just how a lot of AI startups are actually trying to get bought right now because they realize for proprietary model training, it's just so damn expensive. that unless they can raise more money, it makes more sense to cash out, right? So this is a bit of a different story where, unlike the MDS, where you know, you and I could make an MDS tooling company.
Yeah.
For AI, it's like for anything interesting, you have to have a lot of money and a lot of hardware. $7 trillion apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw that. That was Sam Altman wanting to raise $7 trillion to build what, a chip company basically, or multiple chip companies to churn out massive numbers of GPUs or something along these lines.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. And I wonder if the costs are going to come down at some point in two different ways. So first of all, better, hardware optimization, meaning let's figure out, do we really need full floating point capabilities? Can we cut way down on the number of transistors? Plus just more competition in the chip industry to support AI. I think that might be coming at some point. And second, improved model training techniques. Like, do we really need this many parameters, or can we do it with fewer? I just really wonder what the costs of training large language models will look like in, say, 5 years.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what would we be calling them? Large language models then?
Exactly. Or will we be on to the next thing that's not a transformer somehow?
Well, I mean, it's the zeitgeist this year is large multimodal models,
Multimodal.
right? So LLMs, right? So sorry, my voice is starting to die. Worse than it was. Actually, back to a question that Veronica Durgan asked. Why do we not think carefully and focus on architecture? How can we change this?
How do we change it, Joe? Do you have thoughts?
I don't know. What are the first ones? Why do we not think carefully and focus on architecture?
Yeah. I think somehow you need a convergence of maturity to understand the history. I know history sounds boring, but just understand, the history of data and software. It's not without history, but also understand the current things. Like, that's how you have mature architecture thinking. It's understanding, what an AS400 was and why it kind of sucked, and how we can do something better with current tools. But if you don't combine those two perspectives, then you're probably not going to be a very good architect.
Yeah, you got to understand history. I think it's. I think architecture too was sort of done in a cargo cult fashion, especially in the modern data stack era, right? Because I mean, literally, the modern data stack was your architecture as advertised. It's Fivetran, DBT, Snowflake, and Looker, right? So set that up, and there's your stack. I think that's part of it. Then so I think there was a lot of blind faith that the architecture was tooling. But it's interesting if you read books like Clean Architecture, for example, right, by Uncle Bob or Rob Martin. What's interesting about how he defines software architecture is it's a very different way of looking at it. It's about understanding things like DAGs. Like, architecture should be designed as a DAG. Architecture shouldn't go back on itself. For example, there's the notions of solid, which are still somewhat controversial, but and things like that, like writing clean, reusable code. These are the more, and I agree, these are the underlying principles of architecture, right? And as we described it in our book, Fundamentals of Data Engineering, I think we had our own thing, which is, at the end of the day, it's about assessing trade-offs and being able to make reversible decisions using loosely coupled, systems to achieve a business outcome. It's loosely how we defined it. This is also how other people define architecture. Like Venkat describes architecture as being a series of trade-offs, and understanding those. But I think to her question of like, why do we not think carefully? I think because a lot of the hard work was supposedly done for you, right? Yeah. If the diagram is literally in your face, well, you're just going to use that because you want to be a modern data stack user, not the other data stack user.
Yeah, and there is this perpetual problem in the tech industry of letting vendors define conversations around architecture.
Yeah.
And vendors provide a valuable service. They often develop great products. But like, if you think about Mongo, for example, there's suddenly the mean stack,
Oh, yeah.
They defined something that was very self-serving instead of kind of asking, okay, where are we useful in these stacks, in these tech stacks?
Mean stack's an interesting one. Tell me who uses that. So that was a Mongo,
I know.
Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node, right?
Yeah, and it was just like kind of a flash in the pan. It was just a couple of different technologies that were popular at the moment, kind of cobbled together without a lot of thought. Don't think too much about schema. just move fast and break things, and then you end up with a big spaghetti code mess of both code and architecture systems.
Yeah, and I think the same thing with the modern data stack to a large degree. It's like, because what happened is, I think to your question, Veronica, how do you change this? Again, I'm going to keep reiterating this, right? And I've been saying this for a long time. I think the biggest challenge that we have in our industry today, and that we've had for the past 15 years, really, is things have become too easy, and there's a giant gap of knowledge and skills to fully utilize these awesome tools at our disposal. I think the tooling in the modern data stack is fantastic. I think the tooling that we have in general today is awesome. Open source, vendor, whatever. The issue is, you mentioned that organization changed logarithmically, technology changes exponentially. Ramon actually had a rebuttal. If you bisect these two, it's just they cancel each other out because that's what exponents and logs do. But at the end of the day, I would say that practices are at best logarithmic, and I don't know what goes slower than logarithmic, Matt.
That's a good question. I mean, I'll have to think about it more. It
Yeah,
depends on how you're comparing growth.
Yeah, slower rate of change. You just have a constant that I guess divide by whatever constant you want. And there you go. But I think that's where skills are. It's like, so if you're at most companies, right, you're expected to start delivering things, and you don't take the time to really understand the tools, how to use them, how to architect them in the best way, how to model your data and so forth. So I think it's what we're really suffering from right now is a deficit in skills and practices. And I think if we can close that gap, we're going to do great things as an industry, probably once and for all, getting away from, I guess, not answering the questions of delivering value. Is data believable? Is it useful? These kind of things. I think I'm tired of hearing those conversations, but that's where we are.
It's very important. And I think if you think about why cloud is so popular, I was thinking about this, there are lots of arguments in favor of cloud, such as scalability and flexibility and rapid deployment. But fundamentally, I think the key ingredient that makes cloud so popular is that it turns hardware into software. It turns architecture into software.
Yeah.
Deploying an EC2 instance, just run a couple lines of code, and there you go. You can have Lambda functions up in a couple minutes. But the problem with that is that we now inherit all the problems of bad software. And that's where, just like you're saying, we need to go back to fundamentals and say, you can build really sprawling architectures just like you can build a bad code base, but we need something better. And we need to take these tools and use them in better ways.
Yep. Totally agree. So yeah, I mean, I don't think the issues of the just because we put a nail in the coffin of the modern data stack doesn't mean that the issue suddenly disappeared, right? I think it's like it's the old saying, wherever you go, there you are. So what's up, Robert? Oh, I can show comments. Rob, he's a curmudgeon like us, good dude. Could agree more. Somehow that moment when Ben asked us this question on video keeps coming back. Remember that video that we did with the Firebolt guys, where Ben, the younger guy, and was sitting there helplessly watching as Rob, you and me were commiserating about tech and everything. So
yes,
I'm surprised that kid's still in the industry. But yeah, it is what it is. So anyway, thanks for letting us rant for the last hour and 3 minutes. It's been a fun time.
Hopefully it's been a fun time for the audience as well.
Surprised my voice lasted this long.
I am too. Yeah, you need to get well.
I do.
Go sleep for 3 days or something.
Oh man, well, I'm gonna have jet lag, so that's not gonna help too much. So what do we have coming up, Matt?
Let's see, skiers and data at the end of the month. Well, actually, it's on March 1st, so that's the big thing on my radar right now.
Yep. Yeah, going to be in Paris a few days earlier. You're going to be in actually France as well, but somewhere else. So
yeah, I'm planning to be in. I'll kind of be near Switzerland. I'll be in Switzerland, just hanging out for a couple days, and then I'm going to go to Lyon after the conference. So
nice.
Anyone wants to meet up there in the week after that first week of March, send me a message.
Yeah, and I'm in Paris. We got some meet up at something related planned. So if you're around, great, hit me up. And then skid. I don't know why I said skid. Skiers and data. It's probably try to say two things at once. That's gonna be a lot of fun. Thanks to Chris Tab and the Elite crew for putting that on. By the way, I know it's a lot of work. So yeah, kudos. Especially this. I'm gonna give a shout out to Severina, who's with Elite. She's the driving force behind putting everything together. So awesome time. Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. Just a bunch of dorks in the mountains in the Swiss Alps. Pretending to have a conference. I'm kidding. So, and then yeah, and I'm off to Saudi Arabia after that to go speak at Leap and Deep Fest. So that's gonna be a big one. Then actually, from what I heard, actually going back to France, back to Paris a week later, in the middle of March. So anyway, should be fun.
Nice. Yeah. You're
Paris.
never going to get back to mountain time again. You'll just be permanently stuck on European time.
I like Europe though. It's funny because I get more talks in Europe than I do in the States. It's kind of weird, but so it goes. Kind of becoming like the David Hasselhoff, I guess. So just more popular overseas and here.
Do you have a talking car? You probably actually do, but maybe not quite as cool as.
I don't know. You have kind of like the crappy version, right? You have Siri in your car
yeah.
or in your iPhone. I guess is that what Kid is?
Probably, yeah. It's been a while since I'd have to go back and look.
So yeah, I wish I had Knight Rider, but anyway. Well, cool. Then next week, I think we have Jean-Joseph Pirenne on the show. So he's a really awesome. He's the French, so we're gonna have a good conversation by talking about data mesh architecture, all this kind of fun stuff. And I think the week after that we don't have anything planned. Maybe we'll just do maybe record something at Skid with a bunch of people and
I think that
post
sounds
that up. That'd be good.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks to the audience. Large number of people still on. That's pretty cool to see. It's a holiday though, so we can actually keep going. It's President's Day, but
yes. But we'll cut people some slack. Let's see what else we have. Ethan Aaron coming up in March and Tony Bear as well, right? So
Tony Bear, some great guests.
Posting those soon, yeah.
Yeah, it should be good. Cool. Matt, have a great day.
Go rest your voice. Take care.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thank
Bye.
you.